Good evening, everybody. Hi, I'm Bob Rivers. Welcome to another Pop-Up Podcast. And tonight we have some special guests. And we're going to go where Bob Rivers and BJ Shea have never gone before. We're going to talk about something that we both love. And it's tied into how we met and also tied into how we competed with each other. And we bring on with us a special guest, Amy Ulen, who is a school teacher. And she's much more than that. She's part of the Star Trek community. So she's a drama teacher who won the walk-on role in Star Trek Enterprise that I gave away. I shouldn't say I gave it away. We looked for the biggest Star Trek fan we could find on the Bob Rivers Show a few years ago. Let's welcome them both. We'll start with BJ Shea, host of Mornings on KISW forever. How you doing, BJ?
I am doing very well, and I am so happy we get to talk about one of my favorite subjects.
And I expect that you have a lot to say. Amy Ulen, was it 2004 when we were on that Star Trek episode, right?
Yes, you said it a few years ago, and I'm like, almost 20. Wow.
I know. You're a school teacher by profession. And by the way, to me, all school teachers are angels. What grade were you teaching at that age?
At that time, I was primarily teaching sophomore English students. And then between then and now, I transitioned into career and technical education, focusing on computer science. And now I'm at the district level, integrating computer science grades K through 12.
Wow. So science is a huge part of even your pro job.
Yes.
Okay. Let's do this. Let's start with Amy because you're our special guest. Tell us your origin story of becoming a Star Trek fan and what it is that drew you to this particular series, or which particular series, and the characters and the philosophy.
Yeah. So I have been a fan for as long as I can remember. I was too young during the original run of the show. So I watched the original series in syndication, and I was like, I enjoyed it, but I wouldn't, call myself a fan like I became a fan. It really happened because of Shakespeare, as most things do in my life. So when I was in high school, I took a Shakespeare elective, and we saw some of the John Barton videos of teaching Shakespeare, and Patrick Stewart was part of that. I had seen him play Claudius in Hamlet. And so when I learned that The Next Generation was coming out with this British actor, Patrick Stewart, I was like, yes, I love him. And so I became a diehard Next Gen fan, and the rest is kind of history. I am almost a completionist. I am finishing the original animated series, and we've got 4 more episodes to go, and then I will have seen every episode of Star Trek at least once.
So a completionist, I was wondering what that was. It sounded like an alien species. A completionist is someone who's seen every single franchise.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Yep. That's a lot to take in. And interesting that because of your demographic, you weren't part of the original show, but I assume you grew to appreciate Roddenberry's vision. I'll tell you a little about me, and not a lot, but I was the original show watcher between the ages of 10 and 13. I sat down and watched it with my dad, and my dad and I didn't get along. But this show was all about understanding each other's differences to me. So it actually had a therapeutic effect, which we'll get into a little bit later. So and then BJ Shea, let's give your your introduction to Star Trek? Well, you're almost my age, so you might have been there for the original series.
I was there at a much younger age. I was about 6 when it came on, and for the most part, like Amy, I watched it in reruns when it really became huge in reruns, and then they started doing all the conventions and everything when I was in my teens. But I do have a very, very vivid memory of learning about racism from that one episode with Frank Gorshin and Let That Be Your Last Battlefield. And I remember having fights with my Bostonian family, which, shocker, Boston was a relatively racist place. And my family members didn't understand why I didn't share their opinions about racial issues. And because I just remember that episode. And I remember fighting with my father. Were you going to blow up the whole planet? Don't you understand, Dad? If we don't figure this out, the whole planet's going to burn. And he's like, what is wrong with you? That's what happened on the show. And that really got the ball rolling. And this show just grabbed me and educated me like great science fiction does.
From what I have determined, the vision of this one man, Gene Roddenberry, cannot be understated. What would both of you guys say to that?
Well, Amy, have you watched Center Seat, which is on Prime right now? And it was, I think, released for the 55th anniversary.
You know what? I haven't. I have it recorded, but I have not watched it.
Yeah, if you watch that, it gives you a great history of Star Trek and the behind the scenes, the gossip, and it does really paint a little bit of a different picture of Gene Roddenberry. He definitely had a great vision, but he wasn't the only one, Bob. And I think that's what irritates me when I talk to some of my friends who are not happy with the current people that are doing it. Like, for instance, Star Trek Discovery showrunner Michelle Paradise, where they're just saying, this is what Gene would have wanted. And I'm like, well, first of all, there was a lot of things that Gene wanted, thank God, never got to the screen. And second of all, actually, there's some really good stuff out there that happened because they said no to Gene. And I'm a huge fan of what Michelle has done with Star Trek Discovery. So he did a great thing, introduced a wonderful franchise. I will always love the guy for that, but he wasn't the only one that had such an artistic and creative contribution to what this franchise has become.
All right, that's good to know. Let's zero in on what he did contribute, though, because from my limited knowledge, the idea that we would look at our differences and get over them, the idea that there wouldn't be money in the future, the idea that education, kind of a libtard socialist state, some people might say, but the idea that humans would work together and a lot of our problems would be solved, but we'd still be living in the Wild West with the struggle between good and evil in the universe. So that's my, Gene Roddenberry good stuff. You guys are very into the behind the scenes minutia. Also, I've never met a hero who didn't fuck up in some amazing ways that I don't know about. What about that stuff? I mean, every day when I walk into, this is how stupid I am. When I walk into a grocery store and the doors go, shh, when I hold this up to check my heart rate and see if I'm in AFib and how much I walked yesterday, how many steps, all of this stuff. This is the tricorder to me. It's everything. So all of that was kind of visionary from the beginning. If I push back on that argument a little bit, right? That was him. Gene, I mean. Or not.
Yeah, he
go ahead, dash my.
Yeah, he did. And Amy, feel free, Amy, if you want to comment on that too, go right ahead. But he did have the vision of what he thought would be a utopian future, especially with no conflict amongst human beings. The conflict came from the aliens, but his thing was, I don't want anybody who's human to have conflict with other humans. That was his big thing. And you're right, Bob. His vision was really a really great one. I can't take that away from him.
All right, Amy.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it's a long line of science fiction, right? Because science fiction writers have always push the envelope of what is. And then we have these amazing engineers and computer scientists and scientists that come along and say, oh yeah, that's a great idea. I'm going to make it happen. And they make it happen.
And so much of what has happened seems to be envisioned in that world. Like if I look at other franchises, like Star Wars, it's just basically a cartoon to me. A good evil cartoon, very nice stuff.
Well,
but
and I'll jump in on that because the difference between Star Trek and Star Wars, and I love both. I mean, you can see behind me that I've got all the things. But Star Wars is more of a space opera. And so it's really that family relationship story of the Skywalker clan, whereas Star Trek is definitely science fiction and the exploration. And so there's definitely a difference in those stories, and it doesn't make one better than the other. But for me personally, I have gone all in on Star Trek because
do you like them all?
Love it so much. I do like them all.
I do too. Even the ones people argue about, that BJ was bringing up, like there's bands I like Yes, and there's like 18 different versions of Yes, and some people are like, I hate the 90125 Yes. Trevor Rabin, I hated that stuff, that 80s stuff, but I liked this one. I liked drama. I liked that one. And there's something about all of this that is tied together that still, to me, seems to retain that original vision that we find a way to learn to work things out in almost any difficult situation. And racism, you brought that up earlier, BJ. I think that's one of the biggest topics of the show, wouldn't you say? Is we run into a culture that's different from ours, and we have to find a way either to respect them, to negotiate with them, to trick them, or to keep them from tricking us or killing us. Or and in the process of this, what fascinates me about so many episodes is it's human nature we're exploring, even though we're putting it on, alien costumes.
Definitely. It's a lot easier to tackle tough issues if it's blue and green people as opposed to people that look like us. And that was, I think Gene said that. He goes, "You want to know my politics? Watch the show." He, from what I understand, he was never somebody that really came out and spoke politically. He just let the show do the talking. And that's what, like Amy said, that's what great science fiction does. It really does make you look at your world in a not so, confrontational way towards you. You can look at it and realize, all right, no one's attacking me, so now I can be calm and be reasonable and take a look at these ideas and concepts and go, oh, I can apply these to the real world. And that's what great sci-fi does.
Yeah, and that's
Amy,
one of the...
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, that's kind of one of the chief complaints that I think a lot of people have with the newer versions, especially something like Discovery. You hear people saying all the time, like, oh, it's so woke. And it's like, well, Star Trek always has been. The difference is that like older versions of Star Trek were much more subtle in their storytelling, whereas I feel like Discovery really just kind of hits you over the head with it and doesn't allow people to kind of come to their own conclusions. And so I think that's what people are pushing back on and not realizing that it's always told these stories. We just discovered it ourselves instead of being told.
I think, by the way, that's very interesting because we're told so much now that we're all kind of placed in categories by the narratives that are in the news. And so the audience is different. We're coming from a different place than we were when I was 11 years old watching watching Spock with my father. So I was a very insecure kid. I also was, we had a lot of yelling in our household. We were a typical 50s 50s dad who had to work too many jobs, mom juggling 8 kids, and they had come from, parents of a different era also. So I was just happy to sit down with Dad and watch. And I remember watching Spock with his logic, and I remember thinking, I want to be like that. I don't want to be manipulated by human emotions. Because, Spock was struggling between being human and being Vulcan, which was all science and all logic. And I remember thinking that this is a great mentor, this guy Spock. So I actually started using, Spockisms in my defenses against bullies at school, in almost every life situation at that young age, 14, 15. I was a very messed up kid. And I spoke to a friend of ours, brain scientist, John Medina. He actually said that early Spock character was one of the first show business characters, a strong character that in some way represented people on the spectrum of autism a little bit, because his inability to be human was, a bit towards that spectrum, and that he actually helped a lot of people, which seems interesting.
Yeah, I think that's a great observation, which is interesting, where I think another complaint that Star Trek Discovery has is that it's a very emotional show. And that's when you think about where they were in 1966 and the level of emotion that would be shown compared to where we are in 2023. And I would argue this with anybody, that the last season of Star Trek Discovery might be one of the best Star Trek seasons there has ever been because of what they did. I swear they were watching Brene Brown's Axis of Love special and reading her book as they came up with this storyline, because they found an alien race to communicate with, and they had to communicate with the alien race via emotion. It was like they couldn't just use words. They just didn't work that way. And Antonio Damasio is a great neurologist that Brene Brown quoted, that said that humans think that they're just thinking machines that sometimes feel. But he said, no, we're feeling machines that sometimes think, and that emotions really are important for our way of interacting with each other. And that whole season was about that. And a lot of my friends that I grew up with watching that show, who aren't very much in touch with their emotions, and a lot of them happen to be heterosexual males, they just don't like that. And it's like, but that's where Star Trek is going boldly. They're going emotionally boldly where no Star Trek has gone before. Brilliant season. And it's doing, like Amy said, it's what Star Trek has always done. They're like, what needs to be talked about? We're going to do it. And I just love that last season. And most people look at me like I'm crazy, but I'm like, no, I think Michelle Paradise and that whole crew is genius. I think Sonequa Martin Green is terrific. And if we do ever have real aliens that land on this planet, if you've ever seen an interview with her, I want her to speak for the world, because she's an amazing speaker. And it kind of bothers me that the show gets panned the way it is. But then I remember that almost every Star Trek show seems to get panned by the current people and then gets appreciated later.
Yes.
By the way, I'll go to Amy next, but I'll say everyone who's successful gets panned, by the way. Elon Musk gets destroyed. He's the richest man in the world, and he's doing more for global warming than anybody. He's going to put us in space. He's a bit of an asshole, probably. Steve Jobs was, but I still use my iPhone. Here's something about Star Trek, and I just did a quick Wikipedia. It's one of the highest grossing, most successful media franchises of all time. It's made more money. And you don't get all of these shows, all of these spin-offs, all these motion pictures, and recently in Las Vegas, Amy and I were at the Star Trek convention, and people show up not just in costume. People show up, they are aliens. They are not in costume. That is very convincing. And as we talk about this, I'm trying to imagine our audience, because we probably have some people like me who watch the original series and Star Trek Next Generation. And to them, that's their world of Star Trek, because then you would be busy raising their families and, they didn't get into gaming and all the stuff that the modern people are into. And then there's people watching the new series, and some like you and me, BJ, you've probably never left, but I came back to a Discovery and Picard and Brave New Worlds. What a great show. But each one of them, when you watch them, it's not the same. So it's not the same as the series that you have your favorite series, but you gotta invest a little into it. So I'm gonna ask Amy next, which series for an old fart like me would be the most interesting if I hadn't stayed with the franchise?
Oh, wow. Well, I would definitely say if you hadn't stayed, I would definitely jump in with Strange New Worlds, because I think it has enough of the characters and the relationships. And if you can get past the musical episode, then I think that you would really love it. Yeah, and
it also brings you back to the original cast. It brings you back to that Captain Pike is headed for trouble, and then they introduce Captain Kirk. So yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Very nice.
Oh my gosh. And then that scene where Kirk, Spock, and Uhura were sitting in the 10 forward, and I was like, oh, this is their origin story. That was very exciting.
BJ, same?
Yeah, I have to say, if you're somebody that used to watch the old show, and if it's an old fart like you, which is a heterosexual white dude who's old, yeah, that's a really good show to go to and not be afraid if all of a sudden all the important people are female, which is also another thing that I fight with my friends about, that they don't want to admit.
Wow.
But like, if you watch Star Trek Discovery, anybody who's anybody, including the protagonist, the antagonist, and anybody that's a person of import, they're female. And I know the men are just like, this doesn't seem right. And it's like, yeah, well, you were happy when it was the other way around. And for nobody important was anything but a dude. And I always say to them, I go, but I don't care what anybody is, who anybody is. It's a good story with good writing and good acting. I don't care. You put Michelle Yeoh on a show, I am going to watch it because Michelle Yeoh is fantastic. But if you are like an old person, Bob, not to stereotype, I think Amy's right. I think A Strange New World is a great, plus it's episodic, so you can miss a couple episodes here and there and you're not going to be lost. It has Spock
That was helpful to us old folks, because when an episode of I Love Lucy came on, it might be the only one that I saw for a few weeks, and I didn't need to have Ethel, holding me off with something that was going to happen in the next. We used to watch TV. Every episode was self-contained. It was and now, by the way, let's talk about that. Why is it not that way now? Is it because we have to, it's because of streaming, we have to get you to binge? Well, does the average person watch one show? I never do. I might watch 1.5, might watch 2. Is that part of why everything's connected now?
What I remember, and I don't know what show started this. It might have been Kung Fu in 1972, because it did have a story arc where he was looking for his brother. And so it was but they were shown out of order, because that's why they never wanted to have non-self-contained shows, because they didn't know when they put them in order. A show called Firefly was horribly ruined by Fox for that reason. But I think Deep Space Nine went against the grain, and the showrunners were really not happy about it, but it turned out to be very successful when they did introduce this story arc with the founders and the changelings. And that changed everything. Amy, I think that's where we got to see, okay, let's story arc it because of the success of Deep Space Nine.
Right. Well, and it's interesting too, because I've been listening to the Delta Flyers podcast with the Voyager podcast, and the actors talk about the fact that as they're watching, like rewatching these shows, and for Robert Duncan McNeil, like seeing them for the first time, a lot of the episodes, that there's some moments that he's like, oh, I wish we could have carried that forward, but they just didn't do it. Everything was ship in a bottle, episodic, and it didn't, even in Enterprise, we really didn't get until third season with the Xindi, like that became a complete seasonal arc. And a lot of people didn't like that because, again, same thing. It's like if you miss an episode, then you are lost in the storyline. For me personally, I love that kind of storytelling, so I was all for it.
Amy and I were recently at the Star Trek convention here in Las Vegas.
Jealous.
I was curious about it. And I can't remember how we connected that you were coming down here. We visited, we had a nice lunch, but I wandered around a bit by myself and was struck by a couple of things. Of course, I wanted to see the stars. I mean, I got myself photographed with Jonathan Frakes. I went to the keynote, if you will call it, speech by William Shatner. But I also popped in on these little discussion sessions. And, there would be a discussion session where the people up there were the designers of the ships. They were the keepers of the canon of, to some extent, even though these are different shows and people have their favorite ones with different kinds of characters and scripts, but it all has to somehow historically connect to the same timeline, kind of like Lord of the Rings. It all has to be part of this universe. And listening to them discuss, because of course some of the older flashback stuff is made with much newer technology. I mean, I swear they used pie tins as flying saucers in the original Star Trek, but they still have to find a way to stay true. Like Strange New Worlds, Brave New Worlds. Strange or Brave? What is it?
It's Strange. Brave New World is that Aldous. Aldous Huxley did the Brave New World, which is great too.
It has to feel like the same era ship. And I don't know how you would do this designing a car, even though it's much, much more modern. And you get into the subtleties of this, and there's a crowd sometimes of hundreds of people taking notes and wanting to know about the science. Amy, you followed this probably the most of all three of us. What's going on there? Is it deep design? It's something very strange about it to me.
Well, it's interesting because when you go to the Enterprise in Strange New Worlds and are walking around this opulent ship, and then, you think about what it's going to be in just a few years when Kirk takes over. And it's like, oh, we used to have this amazing, like bridge and 10 forward, and which I don't think they called it 10 forward. They did on Enterprise, but I mean, next gen. But it's like what happened to our ship? So yeah, but from the perspective of, even if we're talking about continuity, like it would be, nobody would watch it if we were using the same technology that they were using in the 60s when they created this show. So the people who want it to be the same, they don't. They think they do, but they don't, because as soon as they put something out that looked like it was made in the 60s, they'd be like, turn the channel. So yeah, but then as far as
there's the illusion that they're connected. It's like an illusion that they're connected, right? And they do it. I mean, it's somewhat convincing to me. I mean, to watch any science fiction, of course, you have to suspend your disbelief, and so that's their job, really, is right to seduce us with something close enough, but still eye popping and fun to watch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. But then when
All
you
right,
were talking about canon, you know, you've got the people who are very upset about the Kelvin timeline with the movies, and so then, you know, and
say more for those that don't know what that means. The Kelvin timeline.
Oh, so that was it the 2009? Is that when the
the JJ verse? All the JJ Abrams movies are considered the
JJ
Kelvin
Abrams
timeline.
Okay,
yeah.
He took some liberties, I take.
Well, he created an alternative timeline, is basically what happened.
Okay.
So that different things happened to Kirk and Spock, and you know that way they could tell a new story about the old crew with them being young that hasn't already been told, but like none of us knew what was happening, because being an alternative timeline, things were changed because of a random set of events, created a whole new bunch of things that didn't happen as we remember in the prime timeline, which, it's a, you know, to quote Doctor Who, it's all timey-wimey and wibbly-wobbly. We should try to figure it all out.
So it's something else for fans to argue about it. Amy, but when we were talking before the show, I think we alluded to fans debating different eras, and BJ, you and I have talked about the same thing. It's tied together, but there are fans who only like certain parts.
Oh, yeah. You know, it's a fine line between somebody that wants to really preserve canon and gatekeep. It's a fine line when it comes to an attitude and a tone. And, you know, I love it that, you know, my wife and my daughter were not big fans of Star Trek, and JJ's movies, they both liked, to the point where now they're used to the ships looking amazing, and they're used to great quality and great production. And like Amy said, I don't think my wife would watch Strange New Worlds. She just wouldn't do it if it looked like Star Trek, the original series. So I'm happy for what JJ did, because the essence of Star Trek is there. They're just putting it in a way that is palatable for people of today, because it's not 1966. So it's like, you know, it was like, you can't be presenting people something from, this is kind of why a guy like me, I'm not a big Shakespeare fan, but you show me Sons of Anarchy, which is Shakespeare on motorcycles, I'll watch that. You know, it's just, right. It's presented to me.
Amy, everything comes from Shakespeare, right?
Yes, it does.
Yes, it does. And so, all right, we in our final section here, what should we do? Should we tell a little bit of a story about how BJ and I met and how it led to a good friendship, and then how it led indirectly to us competing for which one of us would get to go with Amy to be on the show? I'll let you start, BJ.
Is it a story or is it a theft? I mean, to me, it was the ultimate theft. You know, using, sure, you had better ratings and much more popular shows, so of course you get the wonderful opportunity to actually be on Star Trek Enterprise and get to go hang with Amy. Could have been me hanging with Amy. We would have had a good time, but no, you stole it from me. You patak.
You know, the logical side of me that knows that you're right, by the way. The opportunity came up to pitch this business from, it was CBS at the time, or Paramount, I can't remember. And, you know, I said, well, I would like to be on Star Trek. And then BJ, I think you called me. You were like, we're up for the same thing. I'm going to kick your ass. I'm going to get it. And, but I'll prequel. How about the prequel to that is, you and I met around 1990. We've known each other about 34, 35 years at an event called Morning Show Boot Camp, where morning shows used to go. It was basically a training seminar, kind of a combination of Harvard and a support group, where morning shows taught each other, you know, and influenced each other, and still exists to this day. And BJ and I show up there, and we had, in some ways we're opposites, and in some ways we're identical, like brothers. And everyone at this convention was, you know, partying and drinking at night and going to, Amy, they call them gentlemen's clubs in Atlanta. I have no idea why the word gentleman is used. You know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
And there was one night that your show was going to a gentleman's club, and I think my guys were going too. And you and I were like, which this is even funnier when you think of what we did later in New Orleans. But you and I are like, I don't know, why would I want to do that? And there was a new Star Trek movie premiering. What year would that be? That would be early 90s. And we said, let's go to the Star Trek movie. So we were the dorks of the convention. And you know, later when we would talk about Star Trek and BJ ended up moving, this is before you moved to Seattle. I ended up moving to Seattle, even though we were direct competitors. We stayed really good friends throughout the entire, whatever it is, 20 something, 25 years. And so Amy, when this came up, this was, you know, these are brothers going after the same thing.
Yeah, this was not pretty.
It was not pretty. We each had to do presentations and of course, the competitive, BJ talks about ratings. We were very close in the ratings, but at that point, I think we were a little bit ahead. And in the end, BJ took over as number one, 25-54. And by the way, you still are number one, 25-54, at least in men category, right? On your show?
Yeah, but you know what? I still am not. I am not on Star Trek any show. That's okay. You take your ratings and put them wherever. Put them in space, buddy.
Shove it all. I wanted to be on that show.
I don't care about any of that. I was robbed.
So we have this contest. Yes.
Well, you know the important part that I was an opportunist because you were very, very successful and I wasn't very successful. So the opportunity, do I want to go pay some woman a ridiculous amount of dollar bills, or do I want to further my career to go hang out with one of the most successful guys in the business who happens to be interested in the same thing I am? I'm like, oh, yes, I'll go to the Star Trek movie because I'd already seen it, but I'm like, I'll see it again with you, buddy, just to be your pal. So I really was an opportunist.
You really did want to go to the strip club. That was a whole, that was virtue signaling.
Well, but I wanted a career. So listen, the strip club is temporary. The career is permanent. Right. So I went for the career.
All right, let's come back around to Amy's part of the story. So I didn't know what to do specifically, but I recall we did some kind of we were looking for the biggest Star Trek fan contest. Amy, do you remember your entry?
Oh my gosh, yes. Yes. So I didn't know about the contest the first week that it ran. Second week, because then when I watched I had taped the show, and when I taped it and I saw the commercial, I'm like, what? How did I not know about this? And so then the second week that it ran, I'm feverishly taking notes, and from school, I'm trying to call in on my cell phone. And then the third week, I'm like, okay, this is the last opportunity that I have. I called in sick and stayed home. I was dialing in on both my landline and my cell phone at the same time. I finally got picked up on my landline, and there were, I don't know how many people ahead of me that were answering, and the people were getting very, very close to the right answer. I had taken notes, so I knew the right answer. And so when I got on, I shouted out the answer, and it was correct. And so then I had to upload my little, 100-word or 50-word story and a video.
Just getting through and being correct only got you a chance.
Right, a chance. One of six. Yeah, and so I remember Spike on the radio was saying, this is not fair for the people who are doing this or qualifying today, because we had to have our little story, we had to have the video. And Bob, I remember you saying, anybody that wants this already has that done. And indeed, I had it done, and I uploaded everything, went back to school, went into my principal's office because I was like, ooh, I need to tell him what I did because I was just on the radio. And so I let him know that the voting was opening up, I believe at 9 a.m. or 10 a.m. that day. So he got on the intercom and announced to the entire school to vote for me And then as I'm walking, because I was a English and drama teacher at the time, I was walking from the main building to the Performing Arts Center, and I had kids like hanging out the window, Miss Ulen, I voted for you. And they were telling me that they like messaged all their family and friends to vote. And I guess within, like hours, I had a lot of votes because my principal went online or announced to the entire school student body.
Wow. That's amazing. Some of that I never knew. And Amy, obviously we got the right person, just except that they picked me instead of BJ, but you are the right person.
One of the right people. You're right. That I will agree with.
Let's segue to the trip, because we go to we get flown to Los Angeles. We get fitted for costumes. As I recall, we both had like little injuries where they had to put a scar on our head or something like that. Do you remember that? Yeah. You and I were both engineers, right?
Yep.
Do you remember the specific episode at all?
I do. It was 0 Hour, the final episode of season 3 of Enterprise. Okay.
Oh, that's
Can we
right.
talk about my traumatic experience with the costume?
Please do.
I do not have the body of someone who apparently survives into the into the future. Now, but I will say this is another reason why I love Discovery and I love the character of Tilly, because we have more similarities in our body composition. And so it just makes my heart happy that those of us that are a little chunky make it into the future. But with the costume, because I could not fit into any of the female costumes, they put me into a male costume, and even that was a bit of a struggle. So they had to take a season 1 costume and like tailor it just for me. And so I don't know if you remember, but like we got taken to the commissary and there was like food and I didn't eat anything all day.
No.
I was
Wow.
like,
I have a similar experience in that the costume was tight on me too, Amy. We're all just normal people. But also, aside from the costume being tight on me, a couple people made remarks that made me feel like I shouldn't be there. They said, well, we never have anyone on the show with gray hair. So apparently, even though Star Trek is all inclusive racially,
don't make it either.
they all use, hair dye, even because there's older people on the show, but they aren't Santa Claus hair color like me. And that was interesting. And also just say a little more about the set. How cool to be on a set and to see a bridge, but it's half open, and to see a hallway, and, to realize, I mean, I know it's dumb. Of course I know these are sets, but to actually be on the set and in the, and walking through the hallways with, and we were random, so we were just, walk-ons. But to see the construction of parts of the ship.
So one of the amazing things was I did not realize that on the set, so the bridge, I just assumed that it was going to be open, but no, it was like a DeLorean car door that would like raise up the whole like front of the bridge section, and then it would lower down and the entire like bridge was enclosed. Yeah. And then the cameras, like I have no idea where the cameras were, because I remember in like one of our scenes, you're working on a console and I come walking behind you and, I go to another touch screen. Like there were no people holding cameras. which is what I guess I would have expected. They were all built into the set. And so it was so easy to like immerse myself into the story, believing that I was there because I didn't see cameras.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but that makes it easier for the actors. Interesting. All right. Let's bring it around. We've talked about Shakespeare. We've talked about the philosophy of Star Trek. We've talked about it being one of the biggest franchises of entertainment in the history of all entertainment, and it really is. And then we've talked about how individual fans, you know, each like certain parts of it. And now we live in a time now of streaming television where mostly our TV is on demand. You don't go to, you know, CBS to watch LA Law or, you know, any weekly drama series or anything. They don't exist anymore. It's all game shows. So television's entered this new age where we can on demand explore new worlds and go to the channels we haven't gone before. Sorry about my frogged up throat. It strikes me that part of what we're doing tonight, of course, is we're all big fans, but we're telling you that there's a lot to explore there. If you want to go deeper into, like Lisa and I are watching Suits right now, just because it has Meghan Markle in it and it's an interesting lawyer show, but it's nothing compared to these Star Trek franchises. And it'd be a good time to start binge watching, wouldn't you think?
There's a lot of great, and look, we're talking about Star Trek, but what a great time to be a science fiction fan because of all the choices you have with Apple TV Plus, Netflix, Prime. I mean, everybody is really wanting. I never thought I'd ever see Isaac Asimov's Foundation ever on the screen, and I really am. I'm very happy with what they've done with that, and so yeah, Bob. I mean, there's so much out there. And Star Trek definitely gets, I think, they get the credit for it because they really showed that sci-fi fans, if you give them something really good, they will watch it. They call us creative obsessives, which is another name for geeks. We spend more on our fan stuff than any other fan of any other thing. So, you know, it's a good time to be a fan of sci-fi fantasy for that reason. Lots of great stuff out there, to your point. You can binge. Oh, I am so envious of people that get to binge Star Trek and have never seen it. Oh man, it's like, what a treat. It might take you a year if you want to do a show a night or a couple of shows a night, a year to do all of it, maybe even more. And that's, to me, that's nirvana right there.
Amy.
Yeah, that's what my niece is doing. So Bob, you met my niece at the convention, and she grew up, I mean, with me. So she has seen a lot of Enterprise. She didn't watch all of it. I mean, not Enterprise, Next Generation. She didn't watch all of it with me, but had seen quite a few episodes. And so then she is really into Discovery, loves Discovery, and Strange New Worlds and Picard. And so now she was like, you know, because she felt like at that convention, she was like, she knows a little bit, but she wants to learn more now because especially she lives in Vegas now. So now we are going to go to all the conventions together.
Sure. I'll see you at the next one. How often do they have them? It's every year, right? Every year.
Yeah. They used to have a lot more like around the country. But she started watching Enterprise and is just continuing on. She found some website that kind of talked about the chronological order. So she's watching the story in chronological order. And so I'm very, very excited for her.
And I think to wrap this up, the message that we started with, that there's so much you can learn from these shows about conflict resolution, being open-minded about people that are different from you. And, you know, and I got it as a kid, just admiring Spock. And I have to say this about Kirk. I watched William Shatner at the convention do 1 hour off the top of his head. Were you there, Amy?
Mm-hmm. Well, I wasn't in that session with him, but I've seen him before. So
you've seen him do this, and it's nothing like what you would expect. He was off the top of his head in 18 different ways, and a truly brilliant philosopher, and playing with his audience about his own. Here's this guy, he's in the 90s now, still doing conventions, still believing in what he did, and went up in space. I'm not sure I would do that. Say,
go into space for real.
So yeah, there's so much to admire and so much to learn. And this has been our pop-up podcast about Star Trek with me, Bob Rivers, BJ Shea, and Amy. You, I feel so blessed that you got picked and continued to stay in this universe. And, and of course, you're a school teacher, so that makes you an angel.
Yeah. Well, and I have to say before we go, just a huge thank you for the opportunity, because it really was a life-changing opportunity for me. I got to write for StarTrek.com covering the Pacific Northwest activities. I ended up being in charge of celebrity at several conventions, being on Star Trek of Gods and Men, being part of Walter Koenig's star ceremonies. So it's like it led to a lot of experiences that I never would have had. So a huge thank you to you.
Now let's see if we can do, I can't do this. Yeah, I'll let you guys do it. BJ Shea, Amy Ulen, and Bob Rivers here. Thank you so much for visiting us on the podcast.